Greetings, buenas noches. My name is Omar Adawahere, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at NYU. On behalf of our Director, Jill Lane, our faculty and students, we want to welcome you and our distinguished guests, Claudia Sparrow and Christopher Santiago, to tonight's event. Given the current state of affairs in the Andean region, but especially in Peru, this conversation based on the film Máxima is all the more relevant and important to have. We want to thank our co-sponsors, the NYU Center for Media, Culture, and History for their support, and the student workers who help us make this event possible. We're also live streaming through CLACS's Facebook page, which you can find at clacs.nyu. Please make sure to follow us to learn more about future events and share live stream conversations with your friends and networks. Now about the speakers. Claudia Sparrow was born and raised in Lima, Peru. Claudia has been recognized as one of the 10 prominent female filmmakers in Peru. Máxima, her feature-length documentary film about Peruvian activist Máxima Acuña, recently premiered at Hot Dogs, where it won the prestigious Audience Award. Christopher Santiago is a sociocultural anthropologist who earned his PhD at Columbia University. Santiago's dissertation, Conga Noa Carajo, concerns peasant resistance to transnational mega gold mines in Cajamarca, Peru. Now, without further ado, I leave the virtual podium to Professor Odi Gonzáles, who's a Peruvian poet and is the instructor of the Quechua at NYU program. And Odi is going to be leading the conversation tonight.
First of all, Claudia, let me congratulate about your magnificent work, revealing the fights of a woman, her epical struggle against the most powerful mining company in the world. Your film is agile and fluent, in my opinion. It doesn't decay at any moment. As a filmmaker, you know how to tell us a good story. For Peru, gold is like a curse. In the past, the conquistadors and Hispanic priests exterminated the whole nation, the whole population of Andean region, my ancestors, our ancestors. Now, after 6 centuries, they are the multinational corporations, the multinational companies, such as the American Newmont Corporation, the Peruvian Buenaventura Mining Company, the World Bank, among others. So the lust for gold is still insatiable. So my first question is for you, Claudia. Tell me, how did you connect with the struggle of these courageous women?
Thank you so much, Professor González. It's my honor to be here tonight and having this such an important conversation and so timely. And also thank you to NYU for having me and everybody who's joining us tonight. So as Omar mentioned, I was born and raised in Peru, and I had been living in the US for many years. When in 2016, I heard of Máxima Acuña for the first time. She had just won the Goldman Environmental Prize, which is equivalent to the Nobel Peace Prize for activists. And a Peruvian journalist, actually, Joseph Zárate, had written a piece about her for a magazine. And I was just so shocked that that had been happening in Peru, and I didn't know on one hand, and on the other hand, that had been happening for so long at the hands of an American corporation. I just couldn't believe that was allowed to happen, that they had gotten away with it. And I just felt so shaken by it that I thought, okay, there must be something that I can do as a filmmaker. And that's basically where it all started. But I was very embarrassed that as a Peruvian, I didn't know that that was happening. And my experience afterwards was actually to learn that most people don't know about it. That's a different conversation, but that's the reality, unfortunately, that the fights that environmental activists, especially from Andean communities, they're hardly talked about or portrayed on mainstream in Peru.
We are joined also by Christopher Santiago. He is an anthropologist and professor who defends his doctoral thesis about this topic. I must confess that Cristobal was my student a few years ago. Chris, my question is, how did you get involved with the Guardians of Water of Cajamarca? What I remember is when you finished the 2 first semesters of Quechua language and culture at NYU, you said, well, I will go to Peru to carry out my field work about shamans of Las Huaringas in the northern region in the Peruvian highlands. So how did you land in Cajamarca?
Well, I did. I originally thought I was going to study Las Huarengas, these sacred lagoons that are known for their shamanism. And I encountered a lot of commercialization of the shaman practices, and a lot of not to say that there weren't good people there really were, but there were also a lot of what people call charlatans. And I had a few bad experiences. And at the same time, I remember listening on the radio and hearing about what was happening in the next province over in Cajamarca, and hearing about these water struggles. And I thought, wow, this sounds really interesting. And I went just to kind of visit, just to check it out for like 2 weeks in, I think in August. And they had just kind of started this new phase of the resistance. They had started building these camps up in the mines. There were 2 camps that the campesinos built, that the farmers built. They were handmade tents made of, bamboo and plastic with rocks holding the plastic down. And it's very high up. It's, 4,500 meters. So that's like 12,000 feet. It's very cold up there. There's a lot of rain. It's very cold, a lot of wind. And I was just so impressed by these people. They let me come with them for, first of all, they invited me to come with them. They treated me like one of their own. They fed me. I immediately got along with them very well. So I went back to Las Huaringas. I went back to Huancabamba for September, and I made it back in October to Cajamarca. And yeah, I just never went back to Huancabamba after that. I stayed. The people, I just can't really say it enough how inviting the people were. I realized that there was something really powerful happening, that these people were fighting for their lives. And yeah, I never looked back.
In Maxima's struggle, I see a conflict not only between 2 worlds, 2 cultures, but also I see a collision between 2 codes, the oral and writing code, the literate and illiterate individuals. For the Peruvian justice, for example, literate people, the evidence of property is only the title of ownership. I mean, a piece of paper, or the medical certificate that legitimizes the injuries of an injured person. As we saw in the movie, in the documentary of Claudia, when Doña Máxima went to the court with her injuries, with her wounds in her body, the ruffian lawyers said, "Where is the evidence of your injuries? Where is the doctor note, something written?" So in my opinion, that is the hegemony of the writing culture over the orality, the most concrete evidence of their wounds, of their injuries, of Maxima, her husband, her children, and even of her animals, were their own injured bodies. However, it is not enough for these people. In the testimony of Mirta Vázquez, Maxima's attorney, maybe I must to say something about her. Now, Mirta Vázquez happily is the president of the Peruvian Congress, the Maxima's attorney. So she is an activist, she is an environmentalist, she is definitely another courageous woman like Maxima. So in her testimony as attorney, she said, "The mining company won because it proved that it was owner of the land. They have offered as evidence the property titles of the mining company Yanacocha. Yanacocha is the consortium of these three companies, Newmont, Buenaventura, and World Bank. But however, they have not demonstrated any objective act of possession." I took this excerpt from the thesis of Christopher Conga Nova Carajo 2017. So my question is, what do you think about these cultural tensions between two worlds, between two cultures, between two codes, orality and writing, and illiterate and literate people, literate individuals? Please, Claudia.
Yes, Professor González. I mean, that is, I would agree. I think that's sadly the core of the problem. There is just such a disconnect from the people from the Andes to, I'm going to say the rest of, specifically Lima. I mean, we know Lima, unfortunately, is where all decisions are made. And so where the government is, the capital. So there is really no in-depth understanding of the reality of indigenous people, people from the Andes, people from the Amazon. And so that was, that became clear right away. As you're saying, you know, just to start, Maxima, for her family, for her community, water and land are sacred. So they are worth dying for, you know, and that's, she was very straightforward about that. Like, that is my mission, you know, I'm going to protect my motherland. I'm going to protect the water until the end of my days. And, you know, for people who are making the decisions, and the executives, even people from the government, people who are from these companies, they don't understand that, you know, for them it's just land. People are just a number at the end of the day. So, you know, there's a complete disconnect there, different set of priorities. And like you were saying, you know, Maxima had been there with her family, not precisely on her land, but in the area. You know, they've been there for hundreds of years. So they have been raising animals, growing food. So there was a clear argument that they could prove possession. And that's what they had all along. They had a certificate of possession, also because there is just no legal way to register an individual parcel of land, which is what Maxima and her family had. So all they are given when you purchase land is a certificate of possession. It's not like, oh, they just didn't go and register it. Like, no, you just can't. You're just given a certificate of possession by the community. and that's what they had all along. And unfortunately, that's what created a lot of these land issues, because the company, excuse me, could argue like, oh, well, we are the ones that have the actual land ownership certificate, even though they couldn't prove possession. And so, you know, as you were saying, absolutely, that has been the core of the problem.
Chris, what about you about this question? But first, Chris, I would like to show us, Chris is wearing a poncho and hat from Cajamarca. Please, could you show us?
Yeah, the poncho is actually made by Maxima too. The poncho made, yeah. It's really beautiful. I don't know if you can really see actually, but it's very finely made. Can't really see it, but yeah, it still smells like sheep, which I love, because I'm actually kicked out of Peru. I can't go back to the country. It's been about 6 years since I've been there. So smelling the sheep really is one of the few connections I still have in a sensory sort of way. I am trying to rectify that, and I was just talking to the consulate again in New York, so we'll see if something comes of that. But yeah, I just wanted to echo what Claudia was saying, that, and what you were saying, Odie, that is a kind of a battle between two different codes, two different sets of values, two different worldviews. And it really can be summed up in the way that the people were shouting, agua si, oro no. You know, it's kind of come to this point where you have to decide, is it going to be capitalism or is it going to be life on this planet? Is it going to be clean water or is it going to be money? It's one or the other, you know? And yeah, just I mean, the sort of racism that I saw was not limited to orality versus literality. That's one form of it. But people would be, Maxima and her family and all of the other campesinos that were part of the struggle would be discriminated against for chewing coca, if they spoke any Quechua words, if they spoke in a type of Spanish that had Quechua inflections or aspects to it. Yeah, dressing like this, you know, dressing like this was another. There's all sorts of different things. But on the flip side, the orality was so strong. It was such a powerful. I mean, I think of it as a weapon. The chanting, the singing, the storytelling, the joke telling, the dream telling. So much was really communicated orally, and yeah, it was incredibly powerful.
Okay, as you know, Maxima is illiterate, but she speaks Spanish. She doesn't speak Quechua, just a few words, like most of bilinguals or mestizos as well. In her region, in Cajamarca, only 2 communities speak Quechua, Chetilla and Porcón Alto. However, the Maxima's Spanish has Quechua syntaxes. She speaks Spanish with Quechua syntaxes. So in 2016, when Maxima was honored by the Goldsman Environmental Prize, she, in the ceremony, instead of giving a speech, she preferred to sing. Do you know why? Quechua language is a language with tendency to concrete action, and one of its most important cultural categories is the reciprocity. One action is paid with another action, not with a rhetorical expression. That is why Quechua language, for example, doesn't have rhetorical expressions such as thank you. For Andean people, a speech, a rhetoric is empty, is abstract, is arid. So in the song, at least there is a feeling, somewhat concrete, than the pure rhetoric. In my opinion, that scent is, for me, the highest moment of the film. It deeply moved me, that moment. Claudia, I want to ask you, what was for you the scent, the moment in your film that impact to you most?
You know, Professor, I have to agree with you, because when I first heard of Maxima, one of the things, again, back to in 2016, after she won the award, I went online, and that was the speech that came out. Well, her singing during, instead of giving a speech, and that just moved me so much that you know, I think that that's what really finally gave me the courage to say, okay, I'm going to do something about it and reach out to them. So I have to agree that that was my strongest impression, and actually how I got to meet Maxima, really. And I think, you know, it's hard to pinpoint, I guess, one specific moment in the film, because she's been through so much, and she's just shown this incredible courage and determination. And something that, to me, at least personally, was always never ceased to surprised me, was, or amazed me actually, was that every time I got back to see her, you know, I felt like, oh, I know Maxima better, or you know, or like, is she gonna say, what is she gonna say that I don't know about, right? And every time that she's such a wise woman, you know, she may not be able to read and write, but I find her so incredibly knowledgeable, and that was one of the things, again, you know, sadly, what happens in Peru, we tend for some reason to think that indigenous people from the Andes, for some, are less worthy or less knowledgeable. And my experience was like, wow, we could really use more of that knowledge. It's so lacking in the world. And you know, again, it was, to me, it was every time I got to spend with Maxima, I felt like it was sacred, because she was just so full of wisdom, so connected to reality, so just such a wholesome person. So, you know, again, it was, I just, every moment I got to spend with her, I was always learning something.
Mm-hmm. And Christopher, what do you say? What was the moment, the highest moment of the movie for you?
Honestly,
We cannot hear.
yeah, sorry. I have to admit, I was crying frequently throughout the movie, because I was there physically in a lot of those moments. And if I wasn't actually in the shot somewhere in the background, not that you couldn't really see me, but I remember being physically there for some of those shots. And at the same time, I'd been in other places that were in the movie, you know, like in Maxima's house. But one of the things that comes to mind right now is how we were dancing in the rain when she won in Cajamarca in 2014, I think it was. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't tell tears from raindrops, you know, because everyone was crying and dancing and in the rain in the street. It was so beautiful. I also remember when I first met her, when we went to Lima from Cajamarca in these trucks, in these camiones, I guess, these
Yes.
big freight trucks. In the back of these trucks with like, you know, I don't even 15, 20 people. Yeah, and then right in front of the office of Newmont, with the images of the 5 people who had been killed behind her, she was waving her documents and crying and saying, you know, here are my documents. If you need to see them, here they are. I remember thinking, who is this? What is going on here? And then the second thought was like, I need to talk to her more. How am I ever going to get to see her? And then it just kind of, over the next few months, it very naturally happened where I kept seeing her and I became closer and closer. But it wasn't really intentional. It just kind of happened because we were in the same places. Yeah. The whole movie was very moving, is I guess my answer.
Definitely, of course. Claudia, I think it was very difficult to make this film. How did you deal with the police, with the people of court, to work without their interference, I mean?
Yes, of course. So Professor Ori, for people, I guess, who don't know, like normally you would, you could take, you could drive from the city of Cajamarca to Maxima's in 2 hours, because the mining company basically closed all entrances to Maxima's house. The only way to get to her was to drive through the Andes. So that made it a much harder trip, which was a challenge every time we had to go shoot. So that made it about an 8-hour trip through the mountains, through dirt paths. And then when we got to the closest security checkpoint, which was still closest to her house, and that was still 20-minute walk. And like Chris was saying earlier, like, it's almost 14,000 feet of altitude, freezing temperatures with all the equipment. Like, the challenge number one was always get to Maxima. Are they gonna let us through? Was the second concern. And it was always challenging. On the other hand, we were warned that usually when people, especially foreigners, not that I'm a foreigner, but sometimes I had a foreign crew, came to visit, that's when the security, the mining security people were behaved the best. And in our case, they always, besides giving us a hard time to access the road, they never physically confronted us. They always, however, made themselves present. When we were visiting Maxima, they always made sure to walk around, drive by. That always happened, but they never confronted us directly. We were always told that it's actually when Maxima and her husband are left alone in the house, that's when all unfortunately, the confrontations have happened.
Christopher himself has a documentary about the Maxima's struggle. Probably the next year, in the spring 2021, we are going to present, and I hope we can connect us with Maxima for the next year, I hope. Since 2011, Maxima has been harassed by the mining company, by the police, by the attorneys of the mining company, for the ruffian lawyers, always. The chase didn't stop even when she was honored with this international prize. Recently, she was convicted of criminal charges on land usurpation. Do you know what is the situation right now with Maxima? Claudia or Christopher, do you know something about her situation?
Yes, so when it comes to her legal cases, as you mentioned, or like the case that we covered in the film was the criminal case. So that one, thankfully, it was a win for Maxima at the Supreme Court in Peru. So those criminal charges are gone. However, there are 2 civil cases pending, and those civil cases are the ones that supposedly determine the actual ownership of the land. That is the case that can take up to 10 years. So as far as I know, it's been moving forward, but slowly. So they have court dates, every few months. There are not examinations, but I guess meetings that happen, or the court people go to the land and they take measures and they do their work. So that is an ongoing process. And then in the US, her US lawyers have filed a lawsuit against Newmont for the human rights violations committed. So that case, the latest is that the appeal was rejected on the basis that there was not enough evidence that Máxima couldn't have a fair trial in Peru, which, as you probably know, is ridiculous because a few weeks later, the Peruvian Congress was dissolved out of all the corruption that was happening in the judiciary. So they are using, the US lawyers are using that information to appeal again. So they've appealed again, and everybody's hopeful that this time the judge in Pennsylvania will finally get more evidence to hopefully give grounds for a trial in the US, which will be really like the best course of justice for Maxima and her family.
Christopher, have you heard something lately about Maxima?
Honestly, I haven't talked to her that much because she doesn't really, as far as I've seen, use Zoom or the internet in the same way as other people. And that's, yeah, it's pretty sad for me, but yeah, I honestly, I can't answer that very well.
Yeah, probably now that Mirta Vázquez is the president of the new Peruvian Congress, maybe her situation can be better. I don't know, but it is important to pay attention. How is the situation of her, right? Actually, the topic of extractivism was filmed for many important filmmakers. For example, When Two Worlds Collide is an interesting, dramatical movie about the conflict between, in this case, is in the Amazonian region. And the other important film is about the tragedy of Choropampa in Cajamarca itself. So what do you think, Claudia, about this attention of the filmmakers to register these conflicts? What do you say about that?
You know, I'm so thankful that the filmmakers made those films, because again, unfortunately, those stories are not being told, are not being shared in mainstream media. Sometimes there's more information about them internationally than in Peru, and you know, we obviously Peruvians, we need to know so that we can hopefully inform, make better decisions about who we vote on the government. So I am personally extremely thankful that those films were made. They helped me to, you know, educate myself, and you know, they were specifically the Choropampa documentary was incredibly helpful, because obviously it was part of not Maxima's journey directly, but the mine company's journey. So you know, it was very quickly evident that this abuse had been happening for long before Maxima's story happened. And that was, to me, again, what was shocking is like, here's a transnational corporation that has been getting away with human rights violations and environmental crimes for almost 20 years. And, you know, they have the support of the World Bank. I mean, not anymore, but for basically 20 years they did. You know, why is this happening? So, I only hope that more filmmakers are encouraged to make these films, highlight stories of remarkable activists such as Maxima, and you know, hopefully we continue to share them with the world.
Well, actually, Christopher, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just that there's a few films that were along with the ones that you were mentioning. For instance, Operation Diablo is very interesting. It shows how the mine has been surveilling people. It goes into depth about surveillance of Mirta and Marco Arana and others. And also the flip side, the way that we would use, I mean, the way that Claudia and others have used film to kind of fight back. For instance, one time, I think it was for the anniversary of the 5 people that were killed, a group of us that were working with the local activists, we collected videos from all around the world of people saying, you know, Congo no va, essentially. And we edited this film together, and then we projected it onto the wall in the Plaza de Armas of Selendín, for the whole, you know, for the whole population of the city. So yeah, that's all.
Okay, we have a lot of questions here in the chat. I am going to start reading some comments. For example, Paul said this, the intro to the film reminds me of the struggle waged by the Garafina in Honduras, Garafuna. I didn't see the movie, but Paul thinks that there are similarities in the struggle of these women from Honduras. Probably is an activist, or she is maybe a fighter, another fighter. I have the questions for Claudia or Christopher, said Mikael. The main tax revenue of Cajamarca for many, many years was the canon minero, which is a tax that the mines paid the regional government of Cajamarca. That money theoretically was being utilized for building roads, infrastructure, etc. Whether that is true or not, with all these groundbreaking environmental legal victories that the campesinos in Cajamarca have been able to make, what have you heard about proposed substitutions of that amount of money with what other resources will the regional government be able to assume the necessities of inversion?
Yes, what I can say is, thank you for the question. This is a complex answer in the sense that the Peruvian government does have responsibility in what is happening. They are also allowing for these environmental abuses to happen. It is also their responsibility to regulate not just the taxes, but how companies pay taxes. There is a book actually that is written in Spanish by a journalist that also details how the Yanacocha company has gotten away also without paying the taxes that it should pay. And so out of all the canon minero, unfortunately, it was not as much money as it should have been. And it wasn't distributed properly. And there is governmental failure there regionally and, I guess federally. So that is on one hand. On the other hand, the question I think we also have to ask ourselves is like, ultimately, there is a cost, and that is something in the film that economist Peter Koning really made me understand. And it's like, we can be getting all this tax money, but let's not forget that once these mountains and these lakes are destroyed, they are forever destroyed. In the process, how many people are getting sick, forever, and not just this generation, but the next generations because of the amount of metals. So what is the cost of these taxes that we are gaining? I think when you really sit down and you do the math, there is no way, it doesn't compensate. I think it's time for Peru to really be aware of this reality, because we are told, again, mainstream, Peru is a mining company. We need mining. That's what pays, everything. We're gonna die without mining, and it is not true. Especially I can say this about Cajamarca. Even though government only pushes mining, people there are agriculturists, they are farmers, and that's what they're trained to do. That's what they're set up to do. That is not being supported at all. So unfortunately, people are left to go and work and support mines because that's all the jobs that are available. So, I think that we, again, ultimately, Peruvians, we really need to educate ourselves, because it's not enough to just believe what we're told, we depend on mining. I think that there are much other sustainable ways that would actually be long-term solutions for people, not just in Cajamarca, but in the rest of Peru.
Here there is another question I would like to answer. The question is, how is it speaking in Quechua a weapon? Actually, Quechua language doesn't deal with concepts and rhetorical expression. Weapon is a concept. Quechua has specifically words, but what kind of weapon? To kill what? no? That is a general term weapon doesn't exist. For example, we have huaracas, macanas, or other specific weapon. Okay.
Maxima and Jaime, and I've heard this from other people too, they would tell me that the engineers actually went with their trucks and they would have to give truckloads of human beings as sacrifice to the lagoons in order to get the gold out. And, you know, you might think that that sounds crazy or something, but it, you know, if you watch the documentary that Claudia made, you see that there is a great human cost to the mining. So you could take this as a kind of a metaphor or an allegory, that there, you know, this kind of human sacrifice that Maxima and Jaime told me that the mine was doing to get the gold out, that on some level this is true. There is a kind of human sacrifice that is occurring. And also, my other friends would tell me, you know, what are all these roads and schools going to be good for if we don't have water? That's another really basic way to understand what Claudia was just saying.
Okay.
The other thing is that it would generate these extreme inequalities. Certain villages would be kind of working with the mine, and they would become very rich, and you would have these ruptures between different towns. They would even within a town like Santa Rosa, you would have certain people that are for the mine, certain people that are against the mine, and the pro miners would attack the anti miners. I met a woman that had been hit in the head with a rock, that she was walking, you know, in a protest, in a peaceful protest. So yeah, there's a lot of costs to the mining.
Okay, really interesting. There is another question here for Claudia. Did you try to speak with the people at Buenaventura? They were basically in charge of the operations against Maxima. They provided the strategy for dealing with the protesters and how to direct the legal case against her, not to diminish the role of Newmont at all, but they were effectively the strong arm of the company.
Yes, so I actually would like to clarify that per the documents that we had access to, and this is part of the investigation that Maxima's legal team in the US conducted for years. They actually got legal documents from Newmont that actually proved that Newmont is the actual organization or company directing the operations at Yanacocha, specifically the security operations. So that was our focus. Buenaventura, I'm sure they have their share of responsibility, but because the evidence we had pointed that it was Newmont, the one that was directing everything that when it came to security operations on the ground in Yanacocha, we focused on them. And basically also that is the evidence that has been used on the US lawsuit against them.
Besides of that, the Newmont company has the 51% of actions.
Exactly, they're the
After that,
Correct.
now Buenaventura has 43, and the World Bank is 6%, something like that. Another question for Claudia. What was your ideal audience in making this film? How was the distribution, exhibition of the film? Was it shown to the communities in Cajamarca? And if so, what was their reactions? That is an interesting question.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, obviously, you know, the dream is that the film travels as much as possible and then can be seen for as many people as possible around the world. We premiered last year in Canada at Hot Dogs. And since the film has continued to play at different festivals all around the world, and now we are finishing our festival run, and we are actually starting to work on both the traditional distribution of the film and then also on our impact strategy. Again, hopefully, we just don't want to tell Maxima's story, but hopefully create some real change. So we're working on that. Obviously, Peru is a key place where we want to show the film, and we are working on a strategy there. it did premiere also at the Lima Film Festival last year. And I was actually very moved by the reaction. We won the audience award, and that meant a lot because it played in Lima, mostly to a Lima audience. And again, people just, I got all these messages telling me how they didn't know that this was happening in Peru. So, you know, again, that was, I was very moved that they responded to it. And so I'm hoping that the more we get to show it in Peru, that we get people to also reflect on this reality and be hopefully inspired to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Claudia, another question for you. How the people can access to the movie if they are interested in?
Yeah, so right now, hopefully we're working to make it available to the general public in the next few months. At the moment, we are just organizing, you know, schools are able, schools or companies or businesses or any organization can get a license to show it. But we're hoping that in the next few months it's available to the general public.
Mm-hmm. Another question for you. Did you talk directly with World Bank? It pulled out of projects. Are they involved in similar projects now?
We reached out to them. We didn't get a response. I did talk to somebody actually off the record. And it proved once again the massive disconnect between people at the offices in DC from the reality on the ground. You know, again, for them, it was like, you know, they literally referred to the people in Cajamarca as stupid and ignorant, because why would they say no to a project that would bring so much wealth? So that was their take. It's his personal take. You know, but these are the people that are approving these projects. So I'm not trying to demonize anybody. I think that, you know, I want to believe that there are good people working there. The problem is that there is not an effort into really working with communities, really understanding their needs, their desires. And they, like, as we portray in the film, they're just incentivized to, like, them, you know, the more loans we get, the better. Like, so that's what they focus on. And ultimately they see people, you know, like Máxima as numbers, and just pieces of land as like objects that doesn't have much more meaning to them than that.
Eric says, our interviews with the mining company showed something different. They basically told Newmont that they would take care of the natives. I know. I don't know.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question. So somebody talked to the mining company and they got a different answer. Is that what they're commenting on?
Yeah, basically they are saying that the in their interviews,
I see.
They say that the Newmont take care of the native people or something like that. No.
Well, of course. I mean, if you go to the website, that's all you're gonna find on the front page. You know, they're gonna go out of their way to say how they work with local communities, that they care about the environment. You know, that they operate sustainably. In my experience, and again, we focus specifically on the Yanacocha mine, that was not the case, and they were aware of that, and it continues to happen. So, you know, on that end, they're not fulfilling their promises or their commitments.
Another question. In doing research on the circumstances of the movie, I discovered these numbers, and I wanted to know what you think about them. The World Bank and its for-profit lending arm, the International Finance Corp IFC, channeled 650 million into 26 gold mining projects in Peru, with an original 23 million to build Yanacocha. But I know that also, meanwhile, the World Bank were advocating for environmental reform that they refer to as do no harm policy, and supposedly having to follow a higher standard. Isn't there an inherent contradiction in their desires? what role does the World Bank serve in this struggle as at times both instigator and then on paper providing aid?
Absolutely, that's also what we found out. I mean, they and we mentioned it in the film too. Experts talk about it. The Accountability Council, actually, organization, they specifically focus on projects that have failed in the World Bank. And you know, you can argue, of course, you know, like it's not easy job what they're trying to do. They're obviously they're gonna make mistakes, and there's always, you know, I guess, you know, human error, like that happens. But the situation is that this has happened for decades. They are aware of it, and they don't change anything in how they're organized. And I just actually remember the previous question regarding the World Bank. You can literally go to their website, and there is a map where it says all the places in the world where there are issues, like problems similar to Maxima's, you know, in which projects financed by the World Bank have gone wrong, and there are like environmental crimes and human rights violations happening, and that they are active. Like you can actually go to their website and see it. And I think that, you know, if they are an organization that is committed to really helping the poor, they should take these claims seriously and really do something, like actually changes, because they do have a system to evaluate the claims, but I think that they should really take further action so that it doesn't happen, because it happens too often.
Mm-hmm. Chris, can you make some remarks about your film, your documentary? How was the process? How was that?
Well, I was focusing on the power of singing and dreaming, basically, because
Mm-hmm.
there's a long tradition in the Andes of dream prophecy, and the Spanish tried to repress this sort of thing, telling the people in Quechua that their dreams were meaningless and that they shouldn't value their dreams and that dreams lie, etc. But for instance, I mean, these dreams are still very powerful in the Andes. Jaime told me that before the cops came to destroy their family's chozas, their family's straw huts, he had a dream of stampeding bulls that came and tore apart their chozas. And he said, you know, these wild animals that have come to destroy our home. So yeah, the symbolism is clear, I think. And he Maxima also had other dreams where she would win her court case. She'd be standing in front of the judge, and the judge wouldn't notice her at first, and she would feel kind of invisible, and she'd be standing there, and finally the judge would look up and ask her, "Who are you? What do you want?" And she would like wouldn't have her papers, and then finally she would find her papers would appear, and the judge would finally grant her justice, and she'd be crying in her dream. And lots of other dreams, but yeah, I just was very fascinated by the way that people could struggle with things like dreams and songs and joke telling.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I hope we can present next semester, as I said. Well, my friends, I want to say thank you for your presence here. And again, I am really thankful to Claudia and Christopher. Thanks very much. Please give attention to our next activities, focus on Andean world from the Quechua program at NYU. Thanks, everyone. Bye.